Captain Quibble Reef had seen better days, but who hasn't? He was crammed into the cockpit of the Pebble, a mining ship that looked like it had been assembled from the galaxy's leftovers after a particularly raucous party. The control panel flickered like a drunk trying to walk a straight line, and the smell of burnt coffee lingered in the air, a testament to the ship's last attempt at making itself useful. Quibble scratched his chin, watching the asteroid field outside, each rock a potential paycheck or a fiery death, or both if you were really ambitious. "Hey, Quib, you awake, or are we waiting for you to snore out the coordinates?" That was Pella, his second in command and the closest thing the Pebble had to a voice of reason, though she had all the warmth of a malfunctioning toaster. "Relax, Pella. Just contemplating the universe and my place in it." Quibble grinned, not that anyone could see through the grime-covered cockpit window. "Turns out I'm not the center of it." "Who knew?" Pella snorted. "I'll alert the media. Now punch in those codes before one of those rocks decides to kiss us." All right. "Keep your spacesuit on." Quibble's fingers danced over the cracked keyboard, entering the coordinates with all the enthusiasm of a man typing out his own obituary. As the ship thrummed to life, he felt the familiar buzz of imminent catastrophe, and he wasn't wrong. The comms crackled, the voice of Sleck, their engineer/professional pessimist, breaking through like a chainsaw to a lullaby. Captain, we got a problem." "Shield walls collapsing." Quibble frowned. "Define collapsing like, we'll need repairs collapsing or kiss your ass goodbye collapsing, somewhere between buy a nice coffin and prepare to haunt the next poor bastard," Sleck replied, his voice punctuated by the clang of metal and the hiss of escaping steam. "Shield walls going down?" Pella asked, eyebrow raised in a way that suggested disbelief mixed with mild amusement, her usual cocktail of emotions. Quibble shrugged. "Yeah, well, it was never much of a wall, more like a suggestion. Captain, you might want to see this," came a new voice, crackling with static. Kesh, the navigator and resident conspiracy theorist, sounded like he'd just stumbled upon the meaning of life, or at least something equally implausible. Quibble nudged the thrusters, bringing the Pebble around to face the source of Kesh's excitement. A massive, shimmering barrier loomed across the screen, looking less like a protective shield and more like a broken kaleidoscope. Its one steady surface rippled and fractured, a cosmic zit ready to pop. "Hell of a lot less shielding, lot more wall," Quibble muttered. Pella crossed her arms. "Well, what's the plan, Captain? We just gonna sit here and watch it collapse? Maybe wait till it's right on top of us for dramatic effect and tempting," Quibble said with a wry smile. "But I was thinking more along the lines of running away very quickly." Before Pella could reply, Kesh cut in, his voice tinged with the kind of hysteria that made you want to tell him to breathe into a paper bag. "We got company." "Not the good kind." "Define good kind," Quibble asked, though he already knew the answer. In space, company was never good unless they were bringing snacks. "Chronarchs," Kesh said, as if dropping a bombshell the size of a moon. "Time-traveling alien bastards just like the stories," Quibble groaned. "Perfect. Just what I needed. Aliens who can't mind their own temporal business." Pella rolled her eyes. "Chronarchs, great. I love a good paradox with my morning coffee." The screen showed the approach of sleek silver ships cutting through space with the kind of precision the Pebble could only dream of. Quibble leaned back in his seat, thinking of all the ways this could go wrong. "All right, crew, let's not panic. They're just aliens with a fancy clock. What's the worst that could happen?" Sleck's voice came through again, deadpan as ever. "Well, they could erase us from history. You know, if they're in the mood." "Wonderful," Quibble said, still smiling. "Let's try to avoid that." The Pebble's engines whined in protest as Quibble pushed them to their limits. The ship groaned like an old man getting out of bed, but it held together, speeding away from the collapsing shield wall and the impending alien presence. Pella checked the rear scanners. "They're gaining on us." "Guess they didn't get the memo about personal space. Maybe they're just lonely," Quibble suggested, though he knew better. "Or maybe they want to borrow a cup of sugar. Who can really say?" Kesh piped up again, his voice as jittery as a caffeine addict with a new espresso machine. "They're hailing us," Quibble raised an eyebrow. "Oh, good." "I was just thinking our day needed more excitement." The comms crackled and a smooth, detached voice filled the cabin. "Human vessel, this is the Chronarch fleet. You are in violation of temporal protocols. Cease your current course and prepare for inspection." "Inspection?" Sleck muttered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "What, they want to check our space plumbing?" Quibble took a deep breath, weighing his options. On one hand, pissing off a fleet of time-traveling aliens sounded like a bad idea. On the other hand, compliance wasn't exactly his style. "Tell them we're on a tight schedule," Quibble said, flashing Pella a grin that was more bravado than confidence. "Warp time waits for no man." Pella relayed the message, her tone as dry as the desert. The silence from the Chronarchs was deafening, a void filled with possibilities, none of them good. The response came after a pause that felt like an eternity. "Non-compliance will result in immediate action. This is your final warning." "Well, they seem friendly," Pella noted, her sarcasm a comforting constant in an otherwise chaotic universe. Quibble sighed. "All right, folks, buckle up. Looks like we're about to find out how much these Chronarchs value a good game of chicken." The pebble shuddered as it veered into a sharp turn, asteroid debris scattering in their wake like confetti at a particularly destructive parade. The Chronarch ships followed, their movements eerily precise, a testament to their disturbing punctuality. "Captain, they're closing in," Kesh said, his voice barely a whisper over the rising tension. Quibble nodded, more to himself than anyone else. "Let's see if they can handle a miner's improvisation." The plan, if you could call it that, was simple. Steer the Chronarchs into the thickest part of the asteroid field and hope their fancy ships weren't as good at dodging rocks as the pebble was at kissing them. Without missing a beat, Quibble directed the pebble into the chaos. "Here's hoping their ships are more fragile than their egos," Quibble quipped, sweating bullets. The field was a mess of tumbling rocks and space dust, a minefield with no map and no clear path. The pebble weaved through, skirting disaster with every turn, the Chronarchs close behind, their ships gliding like predatory sharks. "Engine overheating," Sleck called out, his voice still oddly calm. "Just thought you should know." "Duly noted," Quibble replied, gripping the controls tighter than a miser with his last credit. The Chronarchs were relentless, their ships cutting through the debris with unsettling precision. And then, as if the universe had decided to throw the pebble a bone, a particularly large asteroid loomed ahead, its surface pocked with craters and the scars of ancient collisions. Quibble grinned. Time to test their reflexes. With a flick of his wrist, the pebble veered sharply, brushing past the asteroid's surface with all the grace of a drunk dancer. The Chronarchs had no such luck. Two ships collided with the rock, their sleek forms crumpling like tin cans under a boot. "Two down." "Not bad for a day's work," Pella said, her voice tinged with actual satisfaction. "Let's hope the rest are equally inept," Quibble added, his eyes fixed on the remaining ships. The pursuit continued, the dance of death through the asteroid field pushing the pebble to its limits. The ship groaned, metal scraping metal, every maneuver a gamble with stakes higher than the captain cared to admit. "More incoming," Kesh shouted, his voice barely audible over the chaos. Quibble shook his head. Never a dull moment, huh? But it wasn't more Chronarchs. It was something else, something big and ominous, casting a shadow over the asteroids. The shield wall, or what was left of it, was finally giving up the ghost, collapsing inwards, dragging everything with it. "Looks like our time's up, literally," Quibble said, trying to sound brave and failing miserably. The pebble raced forward, engines screaming, the collapsing shield swallowing the field behind them like a hungry beast. With a final burst of speed, the ship cleared the debris, breaking free of the collapsing wall and leaving the Chronarchs to their fate. The crew let out a collective breath, the tension lifting like a bad dream. For now, they were safe, but Quibble knew better than to get comfortable. "Captain," Pella said, her voice back to its usual sardonic tone, "next time can we just get coffee? It's less dangerous, Quibble chuckled, the sound tinged with genuine relief. I'll put it on the list. The pebble drifted through space, the stars twinkling mockingly, as if to remind them that in the grand scheme of things they were but a speck in the cosmic chaos. Back to work, then? Sleck asked, already tinkering with the engines. Quibble nodded, his grin back in place. Yeah, but I get the feeling our day's just getting started, and somewhere in the depths of space, the Chronarchs were likely plotting their next move, their temporal tantrum far from over. But for now, Quibble and his crew had survived to see another day, ready to face whatever the universe decided to throw at them next. Because in the end, what's life without a little chaos? Quibble Reef rubbed his temples, contemplating the joys of being caught between a rock and a hard place, or more accurately, a collapsing shield wall and a fleet of time-traveling alien jerks. The Chronarchs weren't the sort you'd invite over for dinner, unless you had a vendetta against your crockery and a weird fascination with temporal paradoxes. Okay, status update, Quibble called out, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd just bitten off more than they could chew and was now desperately looking for a napkin. Kesh was the first to respond, as usual, his voice still carrying that edge of conspiracy theorist panic, like a guy who'd just found out his favorite tin foil hat was actually made of aluminum. Chronarchs are still on us, Cap. They want us off the asteroid, like yesterday. Quibble let out a slow breath. What's their beef with our lovely little floating rock? Pella, always the pragmatist, chimed in. Apparently, we're violating some cosmic HOA rules. They're big fans of empty space, I guess. The comms crackled, and the now familiar voice of a Chronarch representative filled the cabin. Its tone was detached, like a bored bureaucrat reading off a particularly dry script. Human vessel, you have ignored our instructions. Vacate the vicinity immediately or face consequences. Consequences, Quibble muttered, rolling his eyes. Always with the consequences. Can't we just get a slap on the wrist this once? Pella shook her head, a half-smile tugging at her lips. I don't think they do wrist slapping, Captain. More like reality slapping. Reality slapping, Quibble repeated, chewing over the phrase like a piece of particularly tough gristle. I hate Mondays. The Chronarch's voice droned on, oblivious to the crew's banter. Failure to comply will result in temporal realignment. You have one cycle to decide. One cycle, Sleck echoed, looking up from his console with a frown. That's what, about as long as it takes to find out you've got spinach in your teeth, or the time it takes to ruin your whole day, Kesh added. Temporal realignment sounds like a euphemism for we're about to screw you over in every possible timeline. Quibble, never one to let existential dread ruin his day, leaned back in his chair. All right, team, let's brainstorm. How do we tell the Chronarchs to shove their demands without ending up as cosmic debris? Pella tapped her fingers on her armrest, her practical mind already spinning. We can't outrun them. Can't fight them either. Maybe we play dead, Quibble scoffed. This isn't possum school. These guys eat paradoxes for breakfast. I doubt they'll be fooled, Sleck, ever the pessimist with a knack for stating the obvious, shrugged. Maybe we tell them we're a registered historic site, protected by intergalactic law. Who knows, maybe they're history buffs. Kesh shook his head, his expression one of genuine disbelief. I doubt they care about the finer points of human legal jargon. They are time travelers, not tour guides. The pebble hummed around them, a gentle reminder of its less-than-stellar condition. Quibble listened to the sound, a low, comforting rumble that almost made him forget they were on a ship held together by duct tape and a prayer. All right, let's not panic, Quibble said, though his voice carried the undertone of a man who was about to panic. Maybe there's something about this rock they don't want us to see. Maybe we can use that. Pella nodded, ever the voice of reason. Sounds like a plan. Well, as much as anything we do qualifies as a plan. Just then the ship shuddered violently, throwing everyone off balance. Warning lights flared across the control panel like a row of angry eyes. Whoa, what was that? Kesh yelped, clutching his seat like it was a lifeline. Sleck checked the readouts, his face an impressive shade of grim. Chronarchs are messing with time. They're trying to pull us back. Time tug-of-war, Quibble muttered, shaking his head. Because flying through space wasn't challenging enough. The ship groaned again, the sensation like being caught in a riptide. The crew held on, everyone knowing full well that if the Chronarch succeeded, they'd be nothing more than a footnote in some alien history book. Suggestions? Quibble asked, his voice tight with suppressed urgency. Maybe we give them what they want. Kesh suggested, though his tone said he knew the futility of it. Quibble snorted, and let them win. Never, Pella rolled her eyes. So what's the alternative, Captain? We just keep running until the universe runs out of patience, pretty much, Quibble said with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. The pebble jerked again, the ship's system struggling to compensate for the temporal interference. Quibble could almost hear the Chronarchs laughing at their feeble attempts to avoid their fate. Options are limited, Sleck pointed out, his voice flat as a pancake on a Monday morning. Either we find a way to outsmart them, or we find a way to outsmart them, Pella finished, shooting a look at Quibble that was part amusement, part challenge. Quibble sighed, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him like a particularly unpleasant hangover. All right, how's this for a plan? We play along, act like we're complying, then make a run for it when they least expect it, so lie and run. Kesh asked, raising an eyebrow. Exactly. The oldest trick in the book, Quibble replied. Sleck nodded, a rare spark of enthusiasm in his eyes. Sounds desperate. I'm in. Desperate is our specialty, Pella agreed, her voice laced with sarcastic camaraderie. The pebble steadied slightly, the temporal interference easing up as the crew settled on their course of action. The Chronarchs, it seemed, were willing to give them a chance to comply, or at least that's what Quibble hoped. Kesh, get on the comms. Tell them we're backing off, but make it sound convincing, Quibble instructed, his mind already racing through the possibilities. Kesh nodded, flipping switches with the finesse of a man born to bullshit. Chronarch Fleet, this is the Pebble. We acknowledge your request and are initiating withdrawal. Please maintain distance. The comms crackled with static, the pause stretching out like a bad joke's punchline. Then the Chronarch's voice returned, as cool and emotionless as ever. Acknowledged. Vacate the area immediately. Quibble exhaled slowly, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in his gut. All right, let's give them what they want for now. The crew worked quickly, adjusting course and powering down non-essential systems to give the appearance of surrender. The Chronarch ships held position, their sleek forms cutting a stark contrast against the backdrop of stars. As the pebble turned away from the asteroid, Quibble kept one eye on the scanners, watching for any sign of pursuit. The Chronarch seemed content to let them go, at least for the moment. Now what? Sleck asked, his fingers drumming a restless rhythm on his console. Now we wait, Quibble replied, his mind already calculating the odds of pulling off their escape. We give them a bit of distance, then we turn around and head back to the asteroid. Whatever they are hiding, it's got to be worth the risk, or it could be a trap, Pella pointed out, her voice as dry as the Martian desert. Could be, Quibble agreed, a wry smile tugging at his lips. But since when has that stopped us? The pebble sailed through the void, the crew tense with anticipation. Each mile they put between them and the Chronarchs felt like another opportunity for disaster, a potential misstep in a dance with deadly consequences. Kesh kept the comms open, his ears tuned for any sign of deception from their alien adversaries. The silence was unnerving, a prelude to the storm they all knew was coming. As they neared the edge of the asteroid field, Quibble made his move. All right, time to see if we can outsmart a fleet of time-traveling aliens. Hard turn, everyone. Let's show them what a mining ship can do. The pebble swung around, engines flaring to life as it shot back towards the asteroid. The crew braced themselves, knowing full well that the Chronarchs would realize the ruse soon enough. Think they'll fall for it? Sleck asked, his voice a mix of hope and skepticism. Quibble didn't answer, his focus on the scanners as he watched for signs of pursuit. The Chronarch ships remained stationary at first, then suddenly they were moving, streaking across the void with alarming speed. Well, that answers that, Pella muttered, her eyes narrowing at the approaching threat. The chase was on, the two sides locked in a deadly dance through the asteroid field. The pebble wove through the debris, its crew working in perfect harmony to keep one step ahead of their pursuers. "Here they come," Kesh called out, his voice tinged with both fear and excitement. Quibble grinned, adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Let's give him a run for their money. Ready the engines for a burst, Sleck." "On it, Captain," Sleck replied, his fingers flying over the controls. As the pebble accelerated, the Chronarch ships closed in, their sleek forms cutting through space with the deadly precision of a surgeon's scalpel. The crew held their breath, waiting for the moment when the aliens would unleash their temporal arsenal. But the moment never came. Instead, the Chronarchs continued their pursuit, their movements eerily synchronized, as if guided by some unseen hand. "Looks like they're playing it safe," Pella observed, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "Good," Quibble replied, a plan forming in his mind. "Let's use that to our advantage." The crew worked tirelessly, pushing the pebble to its limits as they navigated the treacherous field. The ship's engines screamed in protest, but they held together, each maneuver bringing them closer to the asteroid and whatever secrets it held. "Almost there," Kesh said, his eyes glued to the screens. "Hold on tight," Quibble instructed, his hands steady on the controls. "We've got one shot at this." The asteroid loomed ahead, a hulking mass of rock and metal. The crew's hearts pounded in unison, each second stretching into eternity as they raced towards their goal. With a final burst of speed, the pebble shot past the Chronarchs, skimming the surface of the asteroid with all the grace of a bullet in flight. The alien ships followed, their sleek forms struggling to match the maneuverability of the cobbled-together mining vessel. "Now!" Quibble shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. Sleck hit the engines, the sudden thrust propelling them forward and away from the asteroid, leaving the Chronarchs in their wake. The crew watched, breathless, as the alien ships faltered, unable to keep up with the miners' daring escape. As the pebble soared into the void, the Chronarchs fell back, their pursuit thwarted by the audacity of the human crew. For a moment, silence reigned, the crew exchanging glances as they processed their narrow escape. Then slowly, smiles began to spread, laughter breaking the tension like sunlight piercing the clouds. "We did it," Kesh said, disbelief coloring his voice. "Damn right we did," Quibble replied, his grin wide and triumphant. The pebble sailed on, leaving the Chronarchs and their temporal threats behind. For now they were free, the universe once again their playground. And as they drifted through the stars, Quibble and his crew knew that whatever lay ahead, they were ready to face it together. Because in the vastness of space, where time and reality twisted in on themselves like a particularly stubborn knot, there was one truth that held fast. Sometimes, the best way to fight the future was to embrace the chaos. The pebble drifted through the void, its engines humming like a particularly discontented cat. Quibble leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, staring at the chaotic mess of consoles and blinking lights that made up their control panel. It was a wonder they hadn't all been blown to smithereens yet. But then again, it wasn't like he hadn't been expecting to die in the most ridiculous manner possible. "So," Pella said, leaning against the bulkhead with the kind of casual nonchalance that only came from a life of narrowly avoided disasters, "any brilliant ideas on how to outwit a fleet of time-traveling aliens?" "Sure," Quibble replied, scratching at the stubble on his chin. "We invent a paradox so mind-bendingly confusing they decide we're not worth the trouble." "Paradox?" Kesh piped up, still at the comms, his fingers tapping nervously. "You mean like those logical puzzles that make even computers go cross-eyed?" "Exactly," Quibble grinned, feeling a bit like a mad scientist ready to unleash his latest absurd creation. "If we can't beat them with brute force, we'll baffle them with bullshit." Sleck chuckled from his seat, keeping one eye on the flickering screens. "Bullshit's one thing we've got in spades. Problem is," Pella noted, "paradoxes have a habit of backfiring." Like that time we tried using the infinite loop to double our rations. Quibble winced, recalling the food replicator belching out enough chicken curry to feed an army before promptly exploding. Point taken. But it's either that or we surrender to those cosmic bureaucrats, and frankly, I'd rather juggle live grenades. All right, Captain, Sleck said, leaning forward with a gleam in his eye. What sort of paradox are we thinking? Something to do with time, I assume, Quibble nodded. Yeah, something that'll screw with their temporal senses, make them question reality enough to leave us alone. Time travel's a nasty piece of work, Kesh mused, eyes darting across the console like a ferret hunting for its next meal. Maybe we threaten to undo their existence somehow. Pretend we've got a secret weapon that can erase them from history. A bluff, Pella said with a smirk. Classic human strategy. Lie big enough and people might just believe you, and if they don't, Sleck asked, raising an eyebrow. What then? Then we die in a blaze of glory, Quibble replied with a shrug. Or at least a mildly amusing footnote in somebody's record book. The crew laughed, a sound that echoed off the metal walls like a defiant battle cry. It was the only way to deal with the absurdity of their situation. Embrace it, joke about it, and hope like hell they came out the other side more or less intact. All right then, Quibble said, taking a deep breath. Let's brainstorm this paradox. Something that'll throw a wrench in their perfect little timeline. Time is like a river, Kesh said, thinking out loud. Disrupt it one place and the ripples spread everywhere. Sounds like my Aunt Maud's cooking, Pella interjected. One bad meal and you're regretting it for days, Quibble chuckled. Okay, so we need to create a temporal pothole. One big enough that they have to slow down and take notice. Maybe if we threaten to crash into a younger version of their fleet. Sleck suggested, his fingers drumming a rhythm on the console. If they're so hung up on rules and regulations, that should give them pause. Or, Kesh said, his voice gaining momentum, we could claim we've got a recording of them breaking one of their precious laws in the past. Blackmail in the fourth dimension, Quibble raised an eyebrow. Temporal blackmail, that's a new one, but I like it. And if they call our bluff, then we hope they're too busy trying to figure out how we got the footage to keep chasing us, Pella said with a shrug. Risky, Sleck admitted, but it might just work. They won't want to risk a scandal in their perfect little time loop society. All right, Quibble decided, nodding to himself. We'll prepare the doctored recording. Kesh, see if you can pull up some old footage from our database and splice it together. Make it look convincing. Kesh grinned, already pulling up files with the enthusiasm of a kid with a new toy. On it, Captain. I'll make it Oscar-worthy. Meanwhile, Quibble focused on another part of the plan. Sleck, Pella checked the engines. If we need to make a quick getaway, I don't want them stalling out on us like last time. Last time was a fluke, Sleck protested, rising from his seat alongside Pella. I swear, if those bolts hadn't come loose. Just make sure it doesn't happen again, Quibble said with a wave of his hand. I'd rather not become a smear on an asteroid, thank you. As the crew scattered to their respective tasks, Quibble allowed himself a moment of quiet contemplation. It was a crazy plan, but then again, crazy was the only kind of plan that seemed to work for them. Besides, it wasn't like they had much choice. The Chronarchs were a stubborn lot, and if they didn't do something drastic, they'd end up ground to temporal dust. Kesh, how's the masterpiece coming? Quibble called over his shoulder. Almost done, Kesh replied, voice laced with concentration. Just need to add a few more explosions for dramatic effect. Good man. Let me know when it's ready. Minutes ticked by, the crew working with an efficiency born of desperation. The ship hummed around them, the occasional groan of metal a reminder of just how tenuous their situation was. Still, there was a certain satisfaction in knowing they were doing everything they could to turn the odds in their favor. Finally, Kesh leaned back, a satisfied grin on his face. It's done. Not gonna lie, it's a masterpiece of fabrication. Excellent, Quibble said, clapping his hands together. All right, let's see what the Chronarchs make of it. The crew gathered around as Kesh patched the doctored footage through the comms, the fabricated evidence zipping off into the ether ahead of them. Then the waiting began, each second stretching out like an eternity as they listened for a response. The comms crackled, a voice finally coming through, cold and clipped. "This is the Chronarch fleet. We have received your evidence and—" Quibble prompted, leaning forward with anticipation. There was a pause, as if the speaker was reconsidering their life choices. "Explain how you came by this information." Quibble smirked, knowing the game was afoot. "Let's just say we have our ways," he replied, his voice dripping with the kind of smugness that only came from bluffing at a high-stakes poker table. The silence on the other end was almost deafening. "Then we will review the data. Stand by." "Standing by," Quibble said, cutting the comms and turning to his crew with a grin. "I think they're buying it, or they're just biding their time before they obliterate us," Pella pointed out, crossing her arms. "Either way, we've bought ourselves a little breathing room," Sleck said, slipping back into his seat. "That's all we ever need," Quibble replied, settling back with a sigh. "A little time to figure out our next move." With the Chronarchs momentarily distracted, the Pebble continued its journey through the asteroid field, the crew ever watchful for any sign of betrayal. Quibble knew the reprieve wouldn't last forever, but for the moment it was enough. "Think they'll back off for good?" Kesh asked, glancing up from his console. "Doubtful," Pella said, her tone pragmatic. "But it's nice to dream." "Yeah," Quibble agreed, his mind already racing with possibilities. "But we're not out of the woods yet." The ship creaked around them, a reminder of the fragility of their existence. Space was an unforgiving mistress, and they were all too aware of the dangers that lurked in the shadows. "All right," Quibble said, clapping his hands together. "Next step is to find out what they are protecting on that asteroid. Whatever it is, it's big enough to get their knickers in a twist. Think it's worth the risk?" Sleck asked, shooting a glance at the others. "Could be our ticket out of this mess," Quibble replied, "or it could be nothing at all. But we'll never know unless we look. And if they catch us?" Kesh asked, his voice filled with the kind of nervous energy that came from dancing with danger. "Then we think on our feet and hope for the best," Pella said with a shrug. "Exactly," Quibble said, feeling a sense of determination settle over him like an old, threadbare cloak. "We've come this far, haven't we? Might as well see it through to the end." With the crew's agreement in place, the Pebble continued its course, the asteroid looming ever closer. Quibble could feel the tension in the air, a mix of anticipation and dread as they hurtled towards whatever secrets lay hidden within its rocky depths. As they approached, Quibble couldn't help but reflect on the absurdity of their situation. A ragtag group of miners taking on the might of a time-traveling alien fleet with little more than guts and ingenuity. It was the kind of story that would have been laughed out of any sensible pub, but here they were, living it. "All right," Quibble said as the asteroid filled the view screen. "Let's find out what all the fuss is about." The crew worked quickly, scanning the surface for any sign of importance. Whatever the Chronarchs were hiding, it had to be there somewhere, waiting to be discovered. And as the Pebble descended, Quibble felt a flicker of hope amidst the chaos. Perhaps, just perhaps, they'd find something that would turn the tide in their favor. Something that would show the universe, once and for all, that humanity was not to be trifled with. Because in the end, that's what it all came down to. The stubborn refusal to be anything less than a force to be reckoned with. And for Quibble, that was enough. Quibble Reef sat back in his seat, the worn leather creaking like an old man getting out of bed. "All right, folks," he drawled, leaning forward to address his ragtag crew. "Time to throw another paradox at these Chronarch bastards, or at least something that'll make 'em choke on their breakfast." "Assuming they eat breakfast," Sleck chimed in, not looking up from his console. "Time-traveling aliens probably have meals that loop back on themselves." "Like Aunt Maud's cooking," Pella interjected, never missing a beat when it came to family digs. "You start eating and end up back at the beginning." Kesh was busy at his station, fingers flying over keys with the kind of dexterity that suggested a past life as a concert pianist. Had he not been, stuck in space dodging temporal overlords? "Got a new plan, Captain. What if we threaten to blow up something in the past that leads to their creation?" Like their ancestors' pet hamster or something. Quibble shook his head. I think they'd notice that as soon as they saw their own limbs start disappearing. We need something sneakier. How about we just broadcast an endless loop of elevator music at them? Sleck suggested deadpan. At the very least, they'll beg us to stop. I think that's classified as war crimes under the Galactic Convention, Pella replied, smirking. Though, we might have a case for self-defense. Quibble stood, pacing in the narrow confines of the bridge, careful not to trip over the haphazardly strewn toolkits, remnants of the last emergency repairs. What about the classic bootstrap paradox? We claim we've already sent a message back to their leaders warning them of today, but with a twist that makes them question their sanity. Kesh nodded slowly, a grin spreading across his face. That could work. It'd be like giving them a cosmic wedgie. Or a temporal migraine, Sleck added, finally tearing his gaze away from the flickering screens that showed their dire situation. A shield wall teetering on the brink of collapse and the Chronarch fleet looming like an angry mother-in-law. Quibble paused, tapping a finger against his temple. Kesh spliced together some gibberish from old comms. Make it look like a prophetic warning. On it, Captain, Kesh said, already diving back into the files with the enthusiasm of a kid who'd found the secret stash of Halloween candy. It'll be a masterpiece of nonsense. As Kesh worked, Quibble turned to his engineers. Pella, Sleck, keep your ears on the engines. If they so much as hiccup, I want to know. The duo nodded, already moving to their respective stations. The engines hummed with the kind of uncertainty that made you wonder if they'd been fueled with coffee and spite, instead of anything remotely legal. The Pebble continued its uneasy drift toward the asteroid, each moment a gamble in the cosmic casino, where the stakes were their very existence. Quibble couldn't help but feel the weight of it all pressing down on him like an overstuffed spacesuit. A few tense minutes later, Kesh piped up, "Got it. It's like an art film but without the pretentious narration." "Good," Quibble replied, nodding. "Patch it through. Let's see how they like a little taste of their own temporal medicine." The message shot off into the ether, and the crew waited, every second stretching out like a particularly awkward family dinner. Finally, the comms crackled to life, a voice dripping with the kind of disdain usually reserved for telemarketers and politicians. "This is the Chronarch fleet. We have received your message." "And," Quibble prompted, trying to sound like he wasn't sweating enough to fill his boots. A pause. "Your message claims to alter events prior to our existence." "Explain," Quibble smirked, enjoying the mental image of the Chronarch scratching their heads. "It's simple, really. We've already done it, you're just catching up." The silence on the other end was almost palpable, heavy with the kind of confusion that suggested the Chronarchs were having a collective existential crisis. "We will investigate. Stand by." "Standing by," Quibble said, cutting the comms with a flourish. He turned to the crew, grinning. "I think we've got them rattled. Or they're just buying time before they decide to vaporize us," Pella pointed out, forever the voice of reason or pessimism, depending on how you looked at it. "Either way, it's a win," Sleck added, settling back into his seat with a satisfied nod. As the crew busied themselves with their tasks, the shield wall let out a particularly ominous groan, reminding them all that it was hanging on by little more than duct tape and good intentions. "How long until that thing gives?" Quibble asked, eyes flicking to the readouts. "Not long," Sleck replied, a note of resignation in his voice. "We're one sneeze away from becoming space dust." Quibble sighed, rubbing his temples. "All right, we need a backup plan. Ideas, pray," Pella suggested deadpan. "To what?" Kesh quipped. "The gods of mischief. We've got them on speed dial already." Quibble chuckled despite himself. "Let's just focus on holding it together until we can figure out what's so damn special about this asteroid." The ship continued its awkward waltz through the void, the asteroid drawing ever closer, a looming presence that promised either salvation or damnation. Quibble could feel the tension ratcheting up, a coil spring ready to snap at any moment. With nothing left to do but wait, he leaned back, letting the chaos around him fade into a dull background hum. It was as close to peace as one could get when staring down the barrel of a cosmic conundrum. "Think they'll back off?" Kesh asked, breaking the silence. Quibble shrugged. "Depends on how much they value their own history, or their sanity. Maybe we'll get lucky and they'll implode from the inside," Sleck said with a grin. "Like Aunt Maud's souffle," Pella added, not missing a beat. The minutes ticked by, each one heavier than the last as the pebble closed the distance to the asteroid. Quibble knew they were running on borrowed time, every second a gift from the universe's most twisted benefactor. Finally, Kesh clapped his hands together, a triumphant grin on his face. "Got something, Captain." "Looks like a signal coming from the asteroid." Quibble's interest peaked. "A signal? Yeah, something faint but consistent. Could be what the Chronarchs are after. Or a trap," Pella pointed out, ever the realist. Quibble nodded, considering. "Only one way to find out." Prep for landing. As the crew scrambled to ready the pebble, Quibble felt that familiar mix of dread and excitement. A cocktail of emotions served in a chipped glass by the universe's worst bartender. The landing was, as expected, rough, the ship shuddering as it settled onto the asteroid's surface with all the grace of a drunken sailor. Quibble winced at the racket but figured any landing you could walk away from was a good one. "All right, team," he said, rising from his seat. "Let's see what's so special about this rock." The crew suited up, the clumsy dance of donning space gear a routine they could perform in their sleep. Quibble led the way, stepping out into the harsh, unyielding landscape of the asteroid with a mix of trepidation and determination. The surface was bleak, a jagged expanse of rock and dust that offered little in the way of hospitality. But there in the distance was a glimmer, a signal beacon blinking like a lone lighthouse in a sea of misery. "There," Quibble said, pointing it out. "That's our target." As they trudged toward the beacon, each step a reminder of the precariousness of their situation, Quibble couldn't help but wonder what they'd find. Answers. Salvation, or just another layer of complication in an already tangled web. "Think this is it?" Sleck asked, his voice crackling over the comms. "One way to find out," Quibble replied, nearing the beacon. It was an unassuming device, half buried in the dust like an afterthought. Kesh moved forward, examining it with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent far too much time with broken tech. "Looks like it's been here a while. But it's still functional. Think you can decipher it?" Pella asked, her tone mirroring the curiosity in Quibble's own mind. Kesh nodded, already setting to work. "Give me a minute." As Kesh tinkered, Quibble let his gaze wander across the desolate landscape, the weight of their predicament settling heavy on his shoulders. They were gambling with fate, each move a calculated risk in a game where the rules were written by a madman. Finally, Kesh straightened, a triumphant expression hidden behind his visor. "Got it, it's a map." "A map," Quibble echoed, intrigued. "Yeah, and not just any map. This shows a network of Chronarch bases throughout the sector." The revelation hung in the air, a tangible thing that shifted the dynamics of their situation. "So that's what they were protecting," Quibble mused, the pieces of the puzzle slowly clicking into place. "This could be our ticket out of here," Sleck pointed out. "If we can use it to navigate past their patrols. Or leverage it as a bargaining chip," Pella added, ever the strategist. Quibble nodded, the possibilities unfolding before him like a hand of cards dealt by a particularly capricious dealer. "All right, pack it up. We've got what we came for." As they turned to head back to the pebble, Quibble felt a sense of purpose reignite within him, a spark amidst the chaos, a guiding light in the void. They had a chance, however slim, to outwit the Chronarchs and come out the other side with their skins intact. And if they didn't, well, at least they'd go down swinging, defiant to the last, a testament to the indomitable spirit of humanity, even in the darkest corners of the galaxy. As they boarded the pebble, leaving the asteroid behind, Quibble couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of it all. They were a motley crew, a band of misfits navigating the stars with little more than gumption and a penchant for chaos. But somehow, that was enough. The pebble's interior was about as inviting as a hangman's noose, and the atmosphere not much better. The damned shield wall was practically on life support, threatening to collapse like a bad souffle, and the engines grumbled with all the enthusiasm of a teenager asked to clean their room. It was a symphony of doom, a cacophony of impending disaster that played on the nerves like a toddler with a tin drum. Quibble Reef leaned against the bulkhead, staring at the control panel that blinked erratically like a disco ball on its last legs. The situation was grim, no doubt about it, but he'd seen worse. Probably. "All right, folks," he said, clapping his hands to gather the crew's attention. "We've got a map, a plan, and a ship that's mostly not on fire. I'd say we're ahead of the game. Is that optimism I hear?" Pella raised an eyebrow, her voice dripping with skepticism. "We've been through this, Quibble. Optimism's not your look." "Yeah, stick to what you know, Captain," Sleck chimed in from his station, face bathed in the glow of his console, like despair and bitter resignation. "You wear those like a second skin." "Point taken," Quibble conceded, running a hand through his hair. "But still, let's focus." Kesh, always the tech enthusiast, was tinkering with the beacon map hybrid they'd snagged from the asteroid. "This thing's solid gold," he said, eyes glued to the readouts. "Except, it's not actually gold or solid. But you catch my drift," Quibble smirked. "At least someone was having fun. What can we do with it?" "Well, we could chart a path through Chronarch territory. Or we could use it as a bargaining chip like Pella suggested. If we don't implode first." "No pressure," Pella drawled, leaning against the wall with a sardonic smile. The dread was palpable, like the ghost of a bad decision haunting the corridors. The crew knew the stakes, and the weight of their predicament bore down on them with all the grace of a collapsing star. The odds were stacked higher than a gambler's debts, and mutiny simmered beneath the surface like a pot ready to boil over. "We need a plan," Quibble continued, trying to stay on target even as his mind tiptoed around the possibility of insurrection. "If the Chronarchs catch wind of this, we're toast. Or worse," Sleck added. "Burnt toast." "Right," Quibble nodded, the weariness creeping into his bones. "Kesh, keep working on that map. Pella, Sleck, find out what you can about fortifying the shield wall. I'd like to avoid becoming a cosmic curiosity." "Thanks," Pella sighed, the weight of the universe compressed into a single exhalation. "Sure thing, Captain. I'll see if we can't duct tape our way out of this one." As the crew scattered, Quibble lingered, staring into the void outside. The stars twisted and turned, an indifferent audience to their plight. He felt their silent judgment, the cosmic joke at their expense, and it stung like a slap across the face. The ship creaked ominously, a reminder of its fragile state. The shield wall was a hair's breadth from collapse, the engines a symphony of discontent, and the threat of mutiny hovered like a storm cloud ready to burst. He couldn't shake the sense of impending doom, the creeping suspicion that they were about to be caught with their pants down by the Chronarchs. And the crew knew it too, every face etched with anxiety and fear. Pella lingered behind, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "You okay, Cap?" Quibble managed a grin, though it felt more like a grimace. "Just peachy, Pella. You know me, nothing like a good existential crisis to start the day." She laughed, a short bark of a sound, true enough. "Just don't lose it yet, okay? We're kinda depending on you." He nodded, the weight of her words heavy on his shoulders. "I know. Trust me, I'm not going anywhere." As Pella left, Quibble turned back to the expanse of space, his mind racing like a ship at full throttle. The gamble with the Chronarchs, the map, the failing shield wall. It was all a game, and he was running out of moves. In the mess hall, the atmosphere was tense, a thick fog of anxiety hanging over the crew as they gathered for a meager meal. The food replicator had once again malfunctioned, producing something that could generously be described as food adjacent. "What fresh hell is this?" Sleck muttered, poking at the gelatinous blob on his tray. "Looks like they replicated my Aunt Bertha's cooking," Pella quipped, wrinkling her nose. "Is that a war crime?" Kesh asked, eyeing his own tray with suspicion. "Probably should be," Quibble replied, taking a tentative bite. It tasted like despair and recycled air, but he swallowed it anyway. Waste not, want not. They ate in silence, the tension crackling like static electricity. The threat of mutiny loomed, unspoken but ever present, and Quibble knew he had to address it before it tore them apart. He cleared his throat, drawing the crew's attention. "All right, listen up. I know things look bleak, but we've got a shot. That map's our ticket, and we need to stick together if we're gonna make it out of this. Assuming the Chronarchs don't catch us," Pella pointed out, ever the realist. "Or that the shield wall doesn't give out before then," Sleck added. Quibble nodded, acknowledging their concerns. "True. But if we start turning on each other now, we've already lost. We've made it this far because we're a team." "Let's keep it that way." The crew exchanged glances, the mutinous tension ebbing slightly, though it still lingered like a bad smell. Quibble hoped it would be enough. Later, in the cramped confines of the bridge, Kesh was still at it, hunched over the console with a focus that bordered on obsessive. Quibble watched him work, grateful for his dedication even as he worried about its cost. "You need a break, Kesh," he said, breaking the silence. Kesh shook his head, not looking up. "Can't. We're close, I can feel it," Quibble sighed, knowing better than to argue. "Just don't burn yourself out, all right? We need you sharp as a butter knife," Kesh muttered, but there was a hint of a smile in his voice. "Got it, Cap." Sleck appeared, leaning against the console with a casual air that belied the tension thrumming through the ship. "Any luck with the shield wall?" "About as much luck as a snowflake on Mercury," Sleck replied, grim but resigned. "We'll keep at it, but don't expect miracles." Quibble nodded, grateful for his honesty, even if it wasn't exactly comforting. "We'll take what we can get." The days blurred together, a whirlwind of repairs and planning, the weight of their predicament pressing on them like an overzealous sales pitch. The map was their lifeline, a beacon of hope in the void, and Quibble clung to it like a drowning man to a life raft. In the quiet hours of the night, when the ship creaked and groaned like a restless sleeper, Quibble found himself alone on the bridge, staring out into the endless expanse. The stars were distant points of light, indifferent witnesses to their struggle, and he felt their silent judgment like a knife in his back. He knew he had to hold it together for the crew and for himself, but the fear gnawed at him, an insidious thing that whispered of failure and doom. "We've survived worse," he told himself, though the words rang hollow in the emptiness. The next day things came to a head. The crew was gathered in the mess hall, tension thick in the air, when Pella spoke up, her voice cutting through the murmur like a knife. "We need to talk, Cap." "About the plan," Quibble nodded, bracing himself for the storm he knew was coming. "All right, let's hear it." Pella exchanged a glance with Sleck and Kesh, a silent communication that spoke volumes. "We're all worried, Quibble. The shield wall, the Chronarchs. It feels like we're running out of time, and options," Sleck added, his tone matter of fact. "If we're gonna make it, we need to act now. Not later, not when it's too late." Kesh nodded, his focus split between the conversation and the console in front of him. "We can't keep waiting for the perfect moment. We need to move, and we need to move now." Quibble felt the pressure mounting, the weight of their expectations settling on his shoulders like a leaden cloak. He knew they were right, that action was needed, but the fear of making the wrong choice was a specter that haunted him. "We move too soon, we risk getting caught," he pointed out, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "Too late and we're done for. We need to strike a balance." Pella nodded, her expression softening slightly. "We know, Quibble. We need to know you're with us on this." Quibble met her gaze, seeing the fear and determination mirrored in her eyes. They were all in the same sinking boat, and the only way out was through. "I'm with you," he said, the words a promise and a challenge all at once. "We'll get through this. Together." The crew nodded, the moment of tension passing like a storm cloud, leaving behind a sense of unity and purpose. They were a ragtag bunch of misfits, but they were his misfits, and he'd be damned if he let them down. With the map as their guide and their resolve as their anchor, they set to work, a flurry of activity and determination. The shield wall continued to groan and creak, a constant reminder of their precarious situation, but they pushed on, fueled by the fire of desperation and hope. Quibble knew the road ahead would be fraught with danger and uncertainty, but they had a chance, a slim, fleeting chance to outwit the Chronarchs and emerge victorious. And that was enough, because in the end it wasn't just about survival. It was about defiance, about staring into the abyss and refusing to blink. It was about proving that even in the darkest reaches of space, the human spirit burned bright and unyielding. And if the universe had a problem with that, well, it could take it up with the Pebble. Quibble Reef, captain of the perpetually grumbling mining ship the Pebble, swiveled in his creaky command chair, the sound echoing like a dying droid. He surveyed the bridge, a chaotic mess of flickering consoles and blinking lights that screamed impending doom more loudly than a fortune teller at a doom convention. The crew huddled around, looking like they'd rather be anywhere else in the universe. But when your choices were limited to either facing the wrath of time-traveling Chronarchs or becoming cosmic driftwood, the options weren't exactly thrilling. Quibble cleared his throat, feeling the weight of his next words hanging in the air like a guillotine blade. "All right, folks. We've got ourselves a plan." The crew exchanged glances, their skepticism thick enough to cut with a rusted spoon. Pella raised an eyebrow, her face set in its usual expression of "this better not be another death trap." "Cap, what kind of plan?" Sleck asked, folding his arms with the resigned air of a man who knew he was about to hear something profoundly stupid. "A paradox trap," Quibble declared, trying to inject enthusiasm into his voice and failing spectacularly. "We're going to bait those Chronarch bastards into a time loop." Kesh looked up from the console where he'd been obsessively tinkering with the beacon map hybrid, his expression one of cautious curiosity. "A paradox trap. Like trapping them in an endless rerun of the universe's least favorite sitcom, something like that," Quibble replied, appreciating Kesh's knack for colorful imagery. "We force them into a loop they can't escape, make them chase their tails until their heads spin off." "Sounds like a plan only a certified lunatic would love," Pella said, though there was a hint of a smile tugging at her lips. "And I mean that in the best possible way, Cap," Quibble grinned, a lopsided thing that felt more natural than it had in days. "Madness is just a fancy word for genius with a bad marketing team, Pella." Sleck sighed, leaning back against the wall with the heavy-lidded look of a man who'd seen too many such plans end in disaster. "So how do we pull it off without ending up a footnote in the Chronarch's Idiots of the Cosmos ledger? We use the map," Quibble explained, gesturing to Kesh's prized possession. "Set it to broadcast a temporal echo, something so deliciously paradoxical they can't resist." Kesh nodded, catching on. "And when they bite, they're stuck in a loop." "Like a fly in amber, more like a cockroach in a jar," Quibble corrected, not quite ready to give the Chronarchs the dignity of being called flies. "The whole ship?" Sleck asked, clearly envisioning all manner of catastrophic misfires. "What if we end up looping ourselves right into oblivion?" Quibble spread his hands in a universal gesture of "we're already screwed, so why not?" Calculated risk. "We've survived worse. Remember that time with the plasma storm and the malfunctioning espresso machine?" Pella grimaced. "Don't remind me. I'm still convinced that thing was trying to kill us. Point is, this is our shot," Quibble continued, trying to rally them with what little pep talk prowess he possessed. "We either take it, or we wait for the Chronarchs to bend us over a barrel." There was a pause as the crew digested his words, the silence heavy with the weight of what they were contemplating. It wasn't a perfect plan. Hell, it wasn't even a good plan by most measures. But it was theirs, a desperate gamble by a desperate crew willing to fight for their right to continue their cosmic misadventures. "All right," Pella said finally, meeting Quibble's gaze with a look that was equal parts defiance and determination. "Let's do it. Let's make those chronal bastards regret ever messing with the Pebble." Sleck and Kesh nodded in agreement, skepticism giving way to something that felt suspiciously like hope. It was a fragile thing, but in the vast, uncaring void of space, it was a flame worth fanning. Quibble felt a surge of pride, an unfamiliar warmth that chased away the chill of uncertainty. They might be slightly unhinged, possibly outmatched and definitely underprepared, but they were in this together. "All right then," he said, clapping his hands together as if to seal the deal. "Let's get to work." The days that followed were a blur of activity, the crew throwing themselves into preparations with a kind of reckless abandon that bordered on the heroic, or suicidal. The line was often blurred aboard the Pebble. Pella and Sleck focused on the shield wall, patching it up with whatever they could scavenge from the ship's innards. They used duct tape, bits of old hull plating, and the kind of sheer stubbornness that would have made a mule envious. "It's holding," Pella reported one day, stepping back to survey their handiwork with a mixture of pride and disbelief. "For now, anyway." Like a house of cards in a hurricane, Sleck quipped, though there was a touch of admiration in his voice. Kesh, meanwhile, was in his element, the beacon map hybrid becoming an extension of his very being. He tinkered and tweaked, coaxing it to sing the song of paradoxes that would lead their alien foes into a temporal snare. "Almost there," he murmured one evening, rubbing eyes red from too many eyors staring at code. "I can feel it," Quibble checked infrequently, offering encouragement and coffee that was more akin to rocket fuel than anything fit for human consumption. It kept them awake and alert, and if it shaved a few years off their lives, well, time was a luxury they were already in short supply of. Finally, the day of reckoning arrived, and the crew gathered on the bridge, tension coiled tight as a spring. The beacon was primed, the ship as ready as it would ever be, and the horizon held the unmistakable shimmer of Chronarch presence. "This is it," Quibble said, addressing his crew with a solemnity that belied the chaos swirling just beneath his surface. "Once we hit that switch, there's no turning back." Pella nodded, her usual sarcasm tempered by the gravity of the moment. "We're with you, Cap." "For better or worse." "Hopefully not worse," Sleck added, though his grin suggested he was ready for either outcome. Kesh hovered near the console, fingers dancing over the keys with the grace of a concert pianist. "Say the word, Cap." Quibble took a deep breath, steadying himself for the leap into the unknown. The plan was mad, audacious, and liable to blow up in their faces, but it was all they had. "Do it," he said, the command carrying the weight of hope and desperation in equal measure. Kesh hit the button with a flourish and the beacon map hybrid flared to life, broadcasting its paradoxical siren song into the void. The ship shuddered, the shield wall groaning in protest, but it held, just barely. For a moment, nothing happened. The stars continued their indifferent dance, the void remained silent, and Quibble could almost believe they'd gotten away with it. Then the shimmer intensified, reality warping and bending as the Chronarchs took the bait. Their ships emerged from the rift, sleek and menacing, but caught in the web of temporal trickery the crew had spun. "Here goes nothing," Quibble muttered, watching as the aliens maneuvered into the trap, their advanced tech no match for the chaotic brilliance of human ingenuity. The paradox took hold, looping the Chronarchs in a temporal dance that twisted time and space with malicious glee. Their ships shimmered and flickered, caught in an endless cycle of arrival and retreat, unable to break free. "They're stuck," Pella breathed, equal parts disbelief and exhilaration. "We did it." Quibble let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, the relief washing over him like a tidal wave. "We did it," he echoed, the words tasting of victory and incredulity. Sleck chuckled, a sound rich with irony. "Guess that makes us the universe's biggest pain in the ass. Take that, Chronarchs," Kesh added, his grin so wide it threatened to split his face in two. The crew erupted into cheers, a cacophony of joy and triumph that filled the bridge with a warmth that had been absent for far too long. They'd done the impossible, turned the tables on their would-be conquerors, and lived to tell the tale. For Quibble, it was a moment of genuine pride, a testament to the resilience and ingenuity of the human spirit. They were a ragtag bunch of misfits, but together they were unstoppable. As the celebrations died down, Pella sidled up to Quibble, her expression one of newfound respect. "You did good, Cap. Crazy, but good." Quibble shrugged, the grin refusing to leave his face. "What can I say? I guess sometimes you've just got to roll the dice and hope for the best. And if the universe doesn't like it?" she asked, her tone light but curious. Quibble glanced out into the void, the stars still watching but maybe just a little less indifferent now. Then it can shove it. We've got a ship to fly and a universe to explore. The crew returned to their stations, ready to face whatever came next with a renewed sense of purpose and unity. They'd proven themselves in the crucible of adversity, and now, even the vast, unknowable cosmos didn't seem quite so daunting. Because they were the Pebbles crew and they were damn well going to make the universe remember it. The air on the Pebble was electric, which was impressive considering the ship's usual ambience was somewhere between old fridge and deserted graveyard. The control panel flickered like a drunk strobe light, trying its best to match the mood. Quibble stood on the bridge, feeling like some ancient sea captain about to send his ship over the edge of the world, with maybe a bit more existential dread thrown in for flavor. "Here we go, folks," he said, the words gruff with the kind of determination that only came from repeatedly facing certain doom and not dying. Yet, Pella rolled her eyes, arms crossed. "You know, Quibble, if this blows up in our faces, I'm going to haunt your ass." "Oh, Pella, if it goes wrong, you'll have to get in line behind a whole galaxy of pissed-off specters," Quibble replied, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "And that's if there's anything left to haunt," Sleck snorted, leaning back in his chair, his eyes half-lidded as if waiting for the universe to do the inevitable and screw them over. "I'd say it's a 50-50 shot. Heads were geniuses. Tails were cosmic confetti. Kesh was hunched over his beloved beacon map hybrid, fingers working the keys like a maestro conducting a symphony of doom. "I'm betting on heads," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. "Call me an optimist. That's not what I'd call you, but sure," Pella shot back, her smile part wicked, part genuine. The ship's engines hummed their usual disgruntled tune, the sound of a cat too old and too tired to care anymore. The shield wall, hastily patched up with the optimism of duct tape and delusion, groaned slightly. It was about as comforting as a rickety ladder over a pit of snapping crocodiles. Quibble took a deep breath, the kind that usually came before a battle cry or a regretful sigh. This time, it was a bit of both. "All right, Kesh, light him up." With a flourish that suggested a flair for the dramatic, Kesh hit the final key. The beacon map hybrid came to life, spilling out its paradoxical siren song into the universe. The air vibrated with the unnerving hum of temporal trickery, a sound that seemed to twist reality's arm until it cried for mercy. "Okay," Quibble said with all the casualness of a man walking a tightrope over an active volcano. "Now we wait." The space outside warped and shimmered, the telltale sign of Chronarchs taking the bait. Their ships emerged from the void like a pack of hungry wolves, sleek, menacing, and utterly unprepared for the cosmic banana peel they were about to slip on. "Look at him," Sleck muttered, eyes narrowing with a mix of dread and amusement. "Like kids running into a birthday party, not knowing the cake's made of dynamite. Well, here's to hoping they like surprises," Pella added, her voice laced with the kind of dry humor that only came from living too long on the wrong side of sanity. The Chronarch ships moved in, their advanced tech gleaming under the starlight, but they were no match for the chaotic brilliance of the Pebbles crew. As they drew closer, the temporal snare snapped shut, looping them in a dance of time and confusion that left Quibble's head spinning just watching it. "They're caught," Kesh announced, a mixture of disbelief and exhilaration in his voice. Stuck in a time loop of their own stupidity, Quibble allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction, the kind of feeling that usually only came from a victory hard-won and unexpected. "We did it. Color me surprised," Pella said, though her smile suggested that surprise wasn't entirely unwelcome. "Guess this means we don't end up as alien history's footnote." Sleck chuckled, a sound like gravel rolling down a hill, unless they rewrite it as the idiots who used a paradox to save their asses. "But I'll take it." The bridge erupted into a chorus of triumphant cheers, the sound filling the space with a warmth that was almost alien in its intensity. They'd pulled it off, turned the tables on their would-be conquerors, and now stood victorious, if a bit incredulous. Kesh whooped, slapping the side of his contraption with a fondness usually reserved for beloved pets or old friends. "Take that, Chronarchs." "Bet you didn't see that coming." Pella sidled up to Quibble, her expression softening from its usual sardonic edge. "You did good, Cap." "Crazy, but good," Quibble shrugged, his grin refusing to leave his face. "What can I say? Sometimes a little madness is just what the universe needs." As the crew settled back into their stations, the adrenaline ebbing away to leave something that felt suspiciously like calm, Quibble allowed himself to relax for the first time in what felt like an eternity. They'd faced the odds, flipped them off, and come out the other side with a story worth telling. "Well," he said, addressing his crew with a tone that was equal parts pride and disbelief, "I guess we've got a ship to fly and a universe to piss off. Where to next, Captain?" Sleck asked, his grin lazy and satisfied. Quibble glanced out into the void where the stars twinkled like a million indifferent eyes. "Anywhere but here. Let's go make some more trouble." With a flick of the controls and a hum of engines that suggested a newfound enthusiasm for their task, the Pebbles surged forward, leaving the trapped Chronarchs behind to rue the day they'd ever tangled with humanity's finest misfits. As they sailed into the unknown, Pella looked over at Quibble, her gaze steady and unwavering. "You know, Cap, for all your grumbling, you're not half bad at this." "Just doing my job," Quibble replied, though there was a warmth in his voice that suggested otherwise. "And what a job it is," Kesh said, his fingers tapping out a rhythm of victory on his console. "Here's to the Pebble and her crew, the biggest pain in the universe's ass." They laughed, a sound that echoed through the ship like a beacon of defiance in an uncaring cosmos. Because they were the Pebble's crew, and they were damn well going to leave their mark on the universe, one paradox at a time. As the stars streaked by and the ship pressed ever onward, Quibble leaned back in his chair, a contented sigh slipping past his lips. They'd won this round, and whatever came next, they'd face it together, the ragtag bunch of misfits who dared to defy the odds and lived to tell the tale. "All right, everyone," he said, his voice carrying the weight and warmth of camaraderie hard-earned. "Let's go see what kind of trouble we can stir up next." With that, the Pebble and her crew set off into the vast unknown, ready for whatever fresh chaos awaited them on the other side. After all, they were experts at navigating the impossible, and they wouldn't have it any other way. The Pebble continued its shaky flight through the cosmos, engines humming like a choir of disgruntled cats. The shield wall, now functioning as it should thanks to Kesh's patchwork genius, enveloped the ship in a comforting blue glow. Inside, the crew was abuzz with the kind of energy you'd only find after narrowly avoiding a very messy end. Quibble stood at the helm, wearing a grin that was as rare as a peaceful day on a pirate ship. It felt like ages since he'd had a reason to smile that wasn't dripping with irony or despair. "Well, who knew? We might not be the universe's biggest idiots after all." Pella snorted from her perch near the control panel, which was flickering less drunkenly now. "Speak for yourself." "I'm still holding on to my idiot credentials, thank you very much." "Keeps me humble, or keeps you from getting a big head," Sleck added, stretching his long legs out in front of him. He leaned back in his chair with the satisfaction of someone who'd just survived a meteor shower by ducking at the right moment. Kesh was still glued to his station, fingers dancing over the keys like they were playing a symphony of chaos and relief. He turned his head just enough to catch Quibble's eye. "So, what's the plan, Cap? We bask in our own brilliance, or do we find another hornet's nest to kick?" "Basking sounds nice," Quibble replied, rubbing the back of his neck as if trying to erase the tension that had settled in over the past weeks. "But knowing us, it won't be long before we're knee-deep in trouble again. Might as well enjoy the peace while it lasts." The crew erupted into a chorus of agreement, laughter mingling with the steady hum of the engines. It was a sound that, for once, didn't seem out of place on the Pebble. Even the ship itself seemed to purr with contentment, its metallic bones creaking less ominously. "Can't believe we pulled it off," Pella said, shaking her head as if still trying to convince herself of their victory. The Chronarch stuck in a loop of their own ridiculousness. I'd pay to see their faces, you'd have to pay me to see their faces, Sleck replied, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Ugly mugs, the lot of him, Kesh chuckled, his fingers finally pausing in their relentless tapping. Oh, come on, they have their charm. Like, Well, I'll get back to you on that. Quibble leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. All right, crew, let's take stock. What's actually working on this rust bucket the engines are? Well, they're still engines, Sleck said with a shrug. Could be worse. Shield walls as good as it ever was, Kesh chimed in, a hint of pride in his voice. Which, granted, isn't saying much. But hey, it's not actively trying to kill us. The food replicator still hates us, Pella added, eyeing the device with suspicion. It tried to serve me something that looked like it had a staring contest with the abyss. Quibble laughed, the sound rough around the edges but genuine. Guess we'll have to keep surviving on sheer stubbornness and whatever's left in the pantry, which is mostly old rations and despair, Sleck noted, not missing a beat. Ah, my favorite, Pella quipped, rolling her eyes. The crew settled into a companionable silence, each member reflecting on the whirlwind of events that had led them to this moment. They'd faced down time-bending aliens, turned the tables with a paradox, and somehow come out the other side in one piece. More or less. Remember when we thought mining asteroids was our biggest problem? Kesh asked, breaking the silence with a wry grin. I remember, Quibble replied, a nostalgic glint in his eye. Back when our biggest worry was getting squished by rogue space rocks, Pella chuckled, her eyes scanning the stars beyond the shield wall. Ah, the simple days, simple but boring, Sleck pointed out. At least now we have stories to tell, assuming anyone believes us. Truth's overrated, Quibble said, shrugging. A good story's what matters. The crew murmured their agreement, the prospect of spinning tales about their exploits somehow more appealing than the cold, hard truth. After all, embellishment was the spice of life, especially when you spent most of your time dodging cosmic death traps. Here's to us, Quibble said, raising an imaginary glass. The crew of the Pebble, the biggest pain in the universe's ass. Their laughter echoed through the ship, filling the space with a warmth that had been sorely lacking. Maybe they were a ragtag bunch of misfits, but they were damn good at it. So, Cap, Pella said, leaning back in her chair with a grin. What's the plan now? We gonna keep poking the universe until it pokes back, or maybe find a nice beach planet and retire? Sleck offered, though the skepticism in his voice suggested he didn't really believe that was an option. Quibble considered their options, which, as always, seemed to range from suicidal to catastrophic. Let's see where the stars take us. We've done the impossible once, might as well make a habit of it, Kesh nodded, his eyes twinkling with mischief and optimism. Here's to making some noise in a universe that could use a good shake-up. With renewed purpose, the crew turned their attention back to their stations, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The universe was vast, unpredictable, and endlessly dangerous. But that had never stopped them before, and it sure as hell wasn't going to stop them now. As the Pebble surged forward, its journey continued through the stars, driven by the irrepressible spirit of its crew. They'd faced the odds, spat in the eye of fate, and come out the other side stronger and more determined than ever. All right, folks, Quibble said, his voice carrying a note of excitement that hadn't been there before. Let's go find some more trouble. And with that, the Pebble and her crew set off into the unknown, ready to leave their mark on a universe that wouldn't soon forget them. Because they were the Pebble's crew, the biggest pain in the universe's ass, and they wouldn't have it any other way.